Hey, is it possible to speedrun game reviews? Probably not, right? Well, at least it'll be fun to try. Welcome to the 1 Minute Rundown. I'm OC Trinity, and my real last name ends in man, so I'll fit right in with this game's theme, because this time we're running down Mega Man. And by that I mean just the classic series. Yeah, Mega Man's expanded into a lot of different series, which I'm sure I'll cover in a different episode. Here we'll go with the ones people probably remember the best. The classic series actually had a pretty consistent formula. You've got 8 levels to go through, which can be finished in whatever order you want. Once you've finished one, Mega Man gets a new ability related to the boss you just defeated, which will be more useful against another boss, elemental rock, paper, scissors style. And once you finish them all, you're moving on to the game's finale against the series antagonist, Dr. Wily. This episode will cover all of the main series games. Which ones stand out above the rest? Okay, so we've only got 6 Robot Masters instead of the usual 8, and the game actually keeps score, and we've got a special ability that creates platforms that's found in the middle of a level, one that's actually needed to finish the game, but aside from those, we've got the same formula we're used to. That said though, it doesn't quite get gameplay balance right. Usually there's a conscious effort to balance out all the special weapons, but here there's a couple you'll almost never use unless you absolutely have to, and a couple that are just ridiculous. The Elect Beam might very well be the most broken weapon in this whole series, while Gutsman's Super Arm might be one of the most useless. There's also a few enemies and attacks that deal disproportionately high damage compared to others, and a few levels that seem too difficult by comparison. I mean, if you can get through the lifts at the beginning of Gutsman's stage, you can probably handle just about anything else platform-wise this game throws at you. But let's ask the important question. Does any of that kill the game? Not by a long shot. Really, the worst I can say is that the game's had enough sequels that this one doesn't do things quite as well, but does them well enough. This is where the series established more of the common gameplay features. You've got 8 Robot Masters, Mega Man can now restore life points in the middle of a level in the form of energy tanks, and there are 3 other items that aren't attacks but help you reach new areas, and you get them by finishing certain levels. That said, the balance still isn't quite there yet. We've still got a few weapons that seem too powerful, with the Metal Blade quite possibly being the most broken weapon in this whole series. Just look at how many bosses you could fight using it. And the difficulty within levels is still a bit disproportionate, with some pretty much requiring either an item from another level or an exact memory of what's about to happen to get through, and that continues a bit into the endgame with a few late-game bosses that seem unfair if you don't know what to do with them. But I will say the game is one of the best at making sure each level looks and feels completely different than all the others. A lot of the Mega Man fanbase will tell you that if you only play one game out of this series, this is the one you should play. I'll respectfully disagree, but to their credit, it is definitely one of the better games in this series. As far as new features go, this game gives Mega Man a new ability in the form of a slide, which can be used as an evasive maneuver, and adds more variety to gameplay than you might think. It also adds Rush, a robotic doggy companion that transforms to become different navigational items, one of which, the Rush Jet, is probably the most broken non-weapon in this whole series, balanced out only by how much it's needed late in the game. But the weapons, on the other hand, manage to avoid total brokenness and seem pretty balanced, actually. Also on the topic of new characters, meet Proto Man, Mega Man's brother, who occasionally acts as a mini-boss but later turns into sort of an anti-hero. This game also manages to fill a level of nostalgia by including a few bosses from the previous games, which set a precedent for a longer game overall. And this is where I think the series hits its peak. Between more balanced weapons, amazing level design, some memorable boss fights, and addressing whatever flaws were left from the previous 2 games, in my opinion, there's no topping this one. This time, Mega Man can charge his main weapon for more powerful attacks. It's a great new addition, but really it cuts down the need for so many weapons too, especially since a couple of them in this game also just fly straight forward and the need for them is fairly limited. There's also a few navigational items surprisingly well hidden within the levels, but these aren't needed for anything more than getting a few extra lives and energy tanks. But see, here we're also reaching a point where the games feel like they're getting a bit too formulaic, to the point where I really don't have as much to talk about. I mean, when it comes down to it, if you've played any of the other games, you kinda know what to expect already. So, just make it quick, I'd put the level design and weapons variety a little bit behind the last game, but a little bit above the games before that. Yeah, I don't really have much else here. Do I have to fill the whole minute? We're gonna be here all day if I have to do this many games, though. If I cut down early, I promise to do a bonus point segment instead, alright? Okay, deal. there's a bit of a limit on how much a game can keep doing the same thing over and over again without making any changes, and here's where the Mega Man series starts playing too close to that line. The only real addition to this game, aside from new levels and stuff, is a new character in the form of Beat, who manages to be one of the most broken abilities in this series, who's only balanced out by having to collect an item in all of the initial stages to unlock. Well, aside from that, there really isn't much to talk about in terms of new material, so what else can I really say about this one? Well, some of the levels are pretty cool. Gravity Man actually has one of the better levels in this series for exactly the reason you might expect, but overall the level design just feels like a step down. That's all I got. Next one. They've completely reworked Rush this time, and rather than working like other weapons, he's now an adapter that adds a jetpack or increased power whose weapon energy replenishes over time. Which sounds pretty cool, and manages to build entire levels around these by the end of the game. The problem I have here is that since pretty much all the hidden stuff requires it and the endgame revolves so heavily around mastery of it, you won't get the chance to use much of the other weapons anymore. In short, it sort of overtakes the core Mega Man concepts, though to be fair, the fact that so many weapons aren't all that helpful doesn't help that point either. Beyond that, though, the level design, while certainly not terrible, doesn't seem to add much that we haven't seen up to this point past using the jet and power adapters, so in the end we get a game that doesn't stand out much beyond the rest of the series, even less than the games up to here. So while it's not a bad game per se, there's nothing special to see. The obvious change you'll notice first is, well, we've graduated from 8 bits to 16. The next most obvious change is that they added a currency system where you can shop, or maybe crafts considering bolts or screws or some kind of scrap metal as the currency, for energy tanks and lives between levels. However, they also limit things more than necessary by only giving you 4 levels to start and then the other 4 levels once you're done with those, which feels like it limits variety in the order which you could do levels more than necessary, as well as making it a little too easy to tell which weapons work on which bosses. The level design seems a bit hit or miss, but it does find ways to use weapons you're using to explore new areas rather than strictly as weapons. From what I can tell, a lot of the fanbase seems to think this is where the games start to get weaker, or at least to find it as one that works better as staying close to NES style as possible. Instead, I'll say this one took things in a slightly different direction that still works, just only slightly weaker. A lot of the changes are similar to the last game. Another set of 4 levels and then 4 more levels, a graphics overhaul, and another shopping system, though this one focuses more on permanent upgrades than energy tanks and lives. In fact, energy tanks are mysteriously absent from this game, and the closest we get is a few of Rush's abilities. As far as levels go, I want to give them credit for finding other creative ways to use weapons besides just its attacks, something this game does better than some of the rest of the series, but some of the levels get dangerously close to gameplay roulette, especially with the hoverboard and the sky chase shoot-'em-up segments. And a lot of the levels seem like they just take too long. All but a few are split into 2 parts, each of which are about the length of the levels in the games before this. Again, it's not bad, and the type of items you can buy is something I would like to see them do again, but this one doesn't do much to stand out from the rest of the series either. I know I said I would limit myself to the main series, but I'm including this one for 2 reasons. One, because it gets subtly referenced in the main series, kind of making it officially included, and 2, because it's one of the more overlooked games here. It's modeled after Mega Man 8, including carrying over 2 bosses, the shopping system, and most of the graphics. Mega Man's rival Bass becomes a playable character, dropping charge shots and a slide for a double jump, shooting in multiple directions, and a dash. However, some of the levels seem like they're designed specifically with these abilities in mind, making him close to the most broken character in this series. There's an optional quest to collect data discs that you need both characters for, though, and considering both characters can buy different items, it still pulls off multiple characters well enough to make it worth playing both of them. Admittedly, there's one thing I really don't like about this one, and that's a limited number of stages. You've only got 3 to start, each of which unlock a couple more, and all that makes it a bit too obvious which weapons work well on which enemies. But the game has enough variety and fun levels to make up for all that. When this came out, it was the first classic Mega Man game in about 9 years, and in what I take it was an attempt to appeal to the older fans, they made it look and feel like an NES game, probably closest to Mega Man 2. The charge shot and slide were gone and given to a different playable but downloadable character, Proto Man, who also gets a shield, but this is all balanced out by having him take double damage, so he ends up being for experts only. The shop from Mega Man 7, however, didn't get cut, and while the game sort of overcompensates for this by making energy tanks extremely rare in levels, having more variety in items is still good. More importantly though, it gets the Mega Man feel down perfectly, complete with very strong variety in level design, and all of the weapons you'll get feel like they're useful for more than just the bosses they're strong against. There's even a couple extra challenges as DLC. I'll cite this game as one that caused a revival in making games intentionally in a retro style, and that's because, well, it knew what it was doing. This is proof that combining old and new concepts is a great combination. This is clearly an attempt to duplicate the success of the last game while fixing some of the flaws and adding a few new features. Mega Man and Proto Man play pretty much the same as they did in the last game, and Proto Man is available from the beginning, but there's a third character up for DLC, and that's Bass, who plays largely the same as he did in Mega Man and Bass minus the double jump, meaning he's not the most broken character anymore. The game also adds an easy mode, so if your reason for not liking the other games is because they're too hard, this is probably the game you want. But I guess the main question you're asking is it as good as the last one? Well, not quite. I'll applaud the extra character and what feels like a more robust shopping system, but that's about the only advantage over it, and really, neither of those were original either. It's not a bad game. I'm actually going to rank this around the middle of the road, and I'm sure anyone who can't get enough of Mega Man will go for this either way. But after this many games of copying formulas, it just doesn't really do anything different enough to stand out. You know, more of the same. Right, so I promised a bonus points segment, so usually at the end I talk a little bit about the future of each series, but the Mega Man fanbase will hate me if I don't bring this up in detail. There hasn't been a new Mega Man game throughout the entire franchise in a couple years now, and a lot of the fanbase seems to think Capcom is content to just abandon it, a claim that's been picking up in popularity since early 2011 or so, when Mega Man Legends 3 and Mega Man Universe were cancelled. Mega Man himself wasn't included in Marvel vs. Capcom 3, and the series creator KJ Inafune left Capcom, all within a few months of each other. Since then, all that's been announced was a new iOS game, one that everyone seems universally unimpressed with. Now, the Legends crowd has come up in enough force that it's hard to dispute their original claim of lack of fan demand. They have an online petition with more than 100,000 signatures now, but I have a hard time believing they're completely giving up on them since there's still Mega Man characters showing up in crossovers, even if they're not the characters people are hoping for, or if they even get released here. I also have an even harder time thinking they don't plan on doing anything else with the series considering, well, it really hasn't been that long. I mean, despite what companies like Activision and Electronic Arts want you to think, new games in most game series do not usually come out multiple times a year, and the fact this is an exception to the rule might just be spoiling us. Also consider this is the same company that relegated Street Fighter to crossovers for about 8 years before it made a comeback, and by most accounts it took a dying franchise to breathe new life into it. Look, fanbase, I get that you're frustrated over this, I am too, but give it time. That way, whenever Mega Man does come back, the way you actually want him to, it'll be more well-planned and worth looking at. And hey, if I'm wrong, we've always got ROM hacks. That's my take on the classic series, and if you're interested in playing these for yourself, your best bet is to pick up the Mega Man Anniversary Collection, which is one disc containing games 1 through 8. There are a handful of extra games here, particularly a set of Game Boy games that are, from what I can tell, sort of a stripped-down version of the NES games, and a few other miscellaneous spin-offs. Of course, Mega Man's also jumped into 6 other sub-series. The X, Zero, and ZX games are closest to what you just saw, while the Battle Network and Star Force games introduce a lot more RPG elements, and the Legends games are closer to adventure games. I'm sure I'll be covering these in another episode, but in the interest of variety, we'll save it for later on. Instead, check back in 2 weeks for the next episode of 1 Minute Rundown. Mega Man's always been thought of as an icon for one particular game console. Next, we'll look at a game series so strongly associated with his origin console, a lot of people seem to forget he had games afterwards. See you then, and remember, fight on for everlasting peace. Okay, so I realized I said something was the most broken something or other like 5 times in this video. So now I gotta ask myself, which one is really the most broken? Well, obviously, it's this guy. I mean, he created most of this stuff in the first place, plus created another robot that could make use of it. Yeah, that's a real badass right there. I want to see him in the next Smash Brothers.